And welcome everyone to the latest installment of the President's Signature Series, the Creative Writing and Storytelling session. My name is Catherine Cole. I'm a junior studying English and Film and Media on the pre-law track, and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia.
And I'm Isaiah Poritz. I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm a junior studying political science, and I'm also the editor-in-chief of the Emory Wheel, which is the student-run newspaper here at Emory.
Both Isaiah and I have the privilege of being your student moderators today. We are really excited and we feel really lucky to have all of you here. And before we jump in and meet our amazing panelists, I just want to give everyone a brief overview about what to expect for this next hour. We have received all of your pre-submitted questions that you gave us when you signed up for this event. Thank you so much for those. We're going to be trying to get to as many as possible tonight. And if you have any questions that you think of on the spot, please feel free to use the Q&A feature because I believe the chat is now turned off and everyone should be muted. If it looks like something that's already been submitted, we may not get to it immediately. However, we are going to do our best to answer as many questions as possible. With that, I'm going to pass it on over to Isaiah so we can meet our panelists.
Yeah, so I have an immense privilege to be able to introduce two of these really amazing creative writing professors. I think if you're at all interested in this field, this is definitely the place to be. So first, Dr. Jericho Brown is the author of The Tradition, which won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 2019 and was a finalist for the 2019 National Book Award as well. He's completed fellowships through the Guggenheim Foundation, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, and the National Endowment for the Arts, and is the winner of the Whitney Award. His poems have appeared in BuzzFeed, The New Yorker, the Paris Review, Time Magazine, and many other publications. He received his BA from Dillard University, his MFA from the University of New Orleans, and his PhD from the University of Houston. And then our next speaker is Hank Klibanoff. He's a veteran journalist, Pulitzer Prize winning author, and Peabody Award winning podcast host. And most importantly, he is the faculty advisor for the Emory Wheel and also one of my professors in a creative writing class I'm taking. He co-authored The Race Beat, The Press, The Civil Rights Struggle, and the Awakening of a Nation, and hosts the podcast Buried Truths on WABE Radio. At Emory, he directs the Georgia Civil Rights Cold Cases Project, using unsolved racially motivated murders to examine modern civil rights history. Before coming to Emory, he worked at the Boston Globe, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and he's a graduate from Washington University in St. Louis and earned his master's in journalism from the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. So two very qualified and accomplished speakers, and I'm very excited to be speaking with them over the next hour.
Definitely. It's always just so inspiring and cool to hear about everything both of these amazing professors have done. And so with that, we can go ahead and jump into our questions. So first off, just thinking about the current state of the world, how do you think that nonfiction writing, poetry, novels, podcasts, film, and media impact the world around us?
I guess I'll go first.
You're my director, of course.
Can I say this about impact? There are really wide ways in which writing impacts us. Obviously, the work Hank is doing doesn't only uncover what he manages to investigate and uncover, but it also changes the way we think about radio, the way we think about podcasts, the possibilities for students in terms of what they can study at a university at all. There aren't very many universities that can do that have the kind of work that Hank is doing with young people, having them work to actually look at civil rights cold cases and figure out who did these things, or finding the graves of people who were lynched. That's the kind of thing that I think has a almost too obvious impact. The impact that I'm really interested in when I think about the impact of writing is the impact that it has on my heart or my soul or my mind, and how when I read a poem, when I read a story, when I read a novel, if it does the work it's supposed to do and I am open to it, then I come away from that changed. I come away from having read that poem a different person. And I'm a different person because, of course, a poem first touches my emotions. And if it does that for long enough, I start thinking, why am I crying? And so then it touches my mind, my brain, because I'm thinking. And if you sustain a thought for long enough, it really does mean a change in action. So the impact of literature on the world really has to do with individuals who read being willing to change their actions on a day-to-day basis is what I think when I think about impact. Hank?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, my brain sometimes gets split in two ways when I'm reading something, and there is the emotional reaction for sure. I mean, and your way you want to be touched, even if it's anger, whatever it might be, you want to be touched. And when someone touches you, I don't know about you, but my eye goes either to the byline or the cover of the book to see who am I reading?
Yeah.
Who am I reading? And then frankly, sometimes I'll turn and see, and where are they from? And what's their past? What's their background? I can tell you, it's hardly a week that goes by that I don't pick up the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, and I do read these, by the way, or the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and not see an Emory graduate on there. I mean, students who have majored in East Asian studies who have gone on to become writers for those news organizations, and also, I should say, television. The other way that it hits me is, and maybe this is just the professional former journalist in me. I mean, we have something in this country that not every country has, and I don't have to tell anybody on this webinar that, but we have a freedom of speech that is worth protecting, of course, and it's worth defending, and for us not to use that freedom of speech would be such an awful waste. And that's what writers do, whether it's through the written word, the spoken word. We are able to speak openly in this country, and we have I think at the university level, a moral responsibility to show students how they can have that voice and how they're free to use that voice and how to construct their thoughts. And I don't mean dictate the thoughts. I do not mean provide students the way they're supposed to think, but the framework for the thinking. So and that's not a universal right everywhere. So I know we in the creative writing program, as much fun as we have, the faculty, and we do have a lot of fun. Sometimes our faculty meetings take 20 minutes before Jericho can say, okay, are we ready to start doing some business here? We do take our work very seriously, and we know that we have a huge responsibility to the students sitting in front of us.
Yeah, Professor Klibanoff, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you give students that framework.
Well, in my case, I mean, the one course that has come up before now, the Georgia Civil Rights Cold Cases Project, I mean, I'm handing students 50, 60-year-old FBI records and saying, let's figure out what happened here, and their records related to a civil rights killing, a racially motivated killing, or maybe not. We're going to find out. That's what we do. And they're empowered suddenly to go do what they want to do. And I give them direction. I show them methods of research. I bring in others to help me teach the research. And by the way, the best teachers of research in my class are former students who I bring back because they've gone on to do research, several of them at CNN. And some of their skills have surpassed mine at this point. But I think it's empowering students with the knowledge of how to do something. And then opening the door and say, follow your curiosity. Curiosity, there's nothing like it. Good Lord, every minute I just, and feel so blessed that I'm curious, and I'm annoyingly curious. I have a report card that my kindergarten teacher sent my parents, that said, basically, I'm annoying. She says, all he wants to do is follow me around, talking about things, asking questions. And that may be go on my headstone follow me around asking questions, but that's what we're free to do. And so we exploit that, to be honest with you. And I encourage students to ask those questions and to then to pursue the answers.
So the next question, I think both of you all could answer. How do we leverage these types of creative outlets from, podcasting and writing to poetry to elevate our society across all demographics?
Yeah, well, maybe I can start with an answer to that. Just to say, one of the things that I teach isn't just how to read. What I teach students to do is to be self-conscious about their reading. If you're turned on by a poem, if it makes you laugh, if it makes you cry, then part of what we do in my class isn't just, many people have this idea that poems are all about translating or interpreting or somehow finding the strange and hidden meaning. And we actually don't do a lot of that in my class. What we do in my class is we track our reactions. And we track our reactions so that we can use those same strategies that the poet put forth in order to use those strategies in our own poems. So if a poem makes you laugh, at the moment it makes you laugh, you have to ask, if you're a poet, if you're in my class, you have to ask, how did this make me laugh? Do you understand what I mean? So what I believe about that, particularly in the undergraduate level, if you can answer that question, what is it that the writer did that made this funny, or what is it that the writer did that made this moment of the poem moving, and if you can answer that question without looking at subject matter, because we know that you can have a poem about kittens that's a really good poem, and you can have a poem about kittens that's a really bad poem. So if you can quite literally look at how something is crafted in my class, then you can begin to write poems. Now, why does that matter? At the undergraduate level, that matters because that will make you a craftsman of all things. That makes you a craftsperson of rooms. When you walk in a room and you feel peace, you don't just feel the peace. You're like, why do I feel peace in this room? And then you notice the walls are sea blue. And that probably helps with the peace. And then you notice, wait, there's music in this room. There's a little chime that plays every once in a while. That's why when I go to this room, do you understand what I mean? So to answer your question, I think writing wakes us up. And if we do it well enough, and if the writer's doing their job, and if we as readers are doing our job, then we are more awake than we were before. And we know how to make for a better world, how to make for a better place, how to make a more peaceful room. Right? So now when we're listening to music and we're dancing, we don't just dance. We're like, what about this song makes me dance? And it's not just that it's up tempo. There's something going on that makes you dance. So.
Yeah. And gosh, what you're describing in so many ways, I think, is that search for a universal language that that can be very special to every demographic, and yet people find common bond in it. I mean, just dancing alone is a language, and people of all cultures dance. In my classes, when you walk into an Emory classroom and you see such a mix of demographics, you immediately realize that what we have in common just from day one is that I have expressed an interest in teaching a particular course, and these students have expressed an interest in taking this course. So there's a common ground right there in front of us already, no matter where they're from, or in the Zoom world, what part of the world they're zooming in from, which we hope we don't have to do anymore after this semester. I think also, I know that a lot of the work that I do, I don't want to keep talking just about the Civil Rights Cold Cases Project, because I also teach a course in journalism and nonfiction ethics. I teach a course in long form nonfiction writing, basically magazine writing, journalism. And occasionally I'll throw a curveball and do something weird, like this semester I'm teaching a course on journalism in the movies. But I would say that particularly in the cold cases class, I used to teach it in the class, and everything. And I started teaching with Professor Brett Gadsden, and everything we taught and everything we learned was sort of contained in the classroom, right? And then we built a website, okay, which is a little behind, and I apologize to everyone for that. It's just a lot to keep up with, to edit student papers, get them up there, and raise the money to do it, but we're doing it. The other, and now, you know, just my good luck, I was approached about doing a podcast, and that podcast reaches across the world. Buried Truths has gotten, what, 2 million downloads, 2 million, you know, I mean, and they're all over the world. I can't remember the number of how many continents are. I mean, that was not my goal. But I get letters from people in France, you know, who say, I want you to know that I have sat my 2 children down. They're 14 and 16, and made them listen, but I guess made them listen. That's up to them, what kind of punishment they want to inflict upon somebody who doesn't listen. And I realize that social justice is a universal concern. It's a universal concern across all demographics, because we all know someone who, you know, who has been treated in an unjust way, and we all know someone who has treated people in an unjust way. And it works at all levels across all demographics and all cultures. And that's what I'm finding in the classroom as well.
Both of those answers were just absolutely amazing. And one thing I kind of want to touch on is whether it is people who are sharing their stories or these great works of literature and writing. I think I feel a lot all of the time, whether that's excitement or anger or sadness, and it motivates me. And so I would love to know, especially for our undergraduates who are trying to figure out what they want to do when they're coming into college, how do you figure out which one thing you're passionate about and really channel it into what you want to do?
This is a great question. I do think that for many people, it's hard to decide, or there is a figuring out. I want to say, before I completely answer this question, I do believe that there is some figuring out to be done. I think much more often than that, much more often than we admit, there really isn't any figuring out. There's a matter of facing, you know, particularly if you want to be a writer, because so many people have taken time out of their busy schedules to tell you just how impossible it is. I mean, generally, if you're trying to do anything artistic, you know, if you want to sing, if you want to dance, if you want to paint, if you want to act, there are all sorts of reasons for people to stop in the middle of what they are doing to let you know that it is impossible. In spite of the fact that you see people on TV acting, in spite of the fact that you turn on the radio and people are singing, people like to tell you it's impossible. And so often I find, often with freshmen and sophomore students, I find that they come to Emory knowing they want to be a writer, but they don't want to admit it to themselves. And they're always trying to, which is fine. It makes my job a little harder in the classroom, because if you can admit to yourself what you want to do early on, then you can go on and become vulnerable to it. You can be intimate with it. You can understand, as Isaiah understands in the newspaper business, right? Like, this is what I do. So I have to give parts of my life over to that, because this is fueling the fire right now. Do you understand what I mean? So I think I do think there's some searching going on, and I'll say that's what the freshman year is about. The freshman year is about searching and seeing what turns you on, right? But I think in many cases, we actually know for a very long time, I know I knew for a very long time, what we want to do with our lives, how we'd like our lives to look. Sometimes it takes sitting down and writing it. What do you want to do? I mean, if there weren't these other voices in the world telling you what's impossible, what would you do with your time?
For some reason, my mind is flashing to when I was a freshman. Okay. And I remember, and I was at Washington University in St. Louis, and I was at a gathering in their chapel, and a speaker was there, and I'm with all of my friends, and they're all pre-med students, okay, and they're all worried about their chem exam, and they're all worried about, you know, and it's, frankly, it may have been sophomore year, I don't remember, but anyway, and we had as our guest speaking that night the 2 people who founded DNA, Crick and Watson, Okay, and I don't remember which one it was, but he said, I was pretty much and I'm paraphrasing clearly, a wastrel till I was 30 years old. I really didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And here I am. I'm the guy who was credited with finding DNA. And I just felt all of the whole row of my friends, they just all relaxed all of a sudden. It took the pressure off, because he said that passion didn't hit him till late. And some people it won't hit till late. I don't know if I found my passion. I think passion finds the people it wants, and passion found me. And I knew I wanted to, in high school, I knew I wanted to become a newspaper reporter. I just knew that. I had a cousin who was doing that and traveling the world, and I just thought it was kind of cool and wanted to, and then ended up going to a school that didn't have any journalism. Okay. And I have to say that later when I became an editor and I'm looking at resumes of job applicants, I very rarely look to see what people majored in, to see if they majored in journalism, because some of the best students that I wanted were biology majors. And in fact, in the Civil Rights Cold Cases Project, some of the most amazing discoveries and papers and work have been done by students who were biology majors. Okay. And so you really can't tell, and it will hit when it hits. But I knew I wanted to be a journalist. After 4 years, I went off and got my master's, and thank goodness I did then. And then I started taking a job in Mississippi, of all places, And I never looked back until after about 35 years, and it was time for something else. And I've just ignited that passion all over again here at Emory, because if I say this will sound wrong. If I say because they let me do what I want to do, I don't mean that, because I'm not that, whatever it is. But they like a good idea. I mean, you go to a college and say, I want to teach a history course, totally through the prism of unpunished, racially motivated murders. A history course, basically with some journalism in it, and for them to say, oh, sure, go ahead, it's pretty extraordinary, And then a few years later, I'm walking through a cemetery deep in the woods of Southeast Georgia with 3 students at a cemetery. And one of my students, a biology major, by the way, who co-majored in American Studies, finds the gravesite of a man who had been killed in 1948 and whose story we were telling and examining. And the gravesite had been lost to the family for 67 years. And our Emory student found it, okay? Now, this student had fully intended to become a veterinarian. That was a large animal veterinarian. She had it nailed down. And she told me that as we're driving down there. I'm meeting her and the 2 other students. We're driving down, didn't know them that well. And that day changed her life. In a few weeks, she's going to graduate from Duke Law. And it's not that I'm trying to turn veterinarian students away from law, but it had that effect, not me. The course had that effect, So the passion finds the person.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, so if you can't tell, Professor Klibanoff is an amazing storyteller. And if you ever take one of his classes, you'll get, quite a few really amazing stories out of him. So that's a huge advantage doing that. And I just want to kind of reiterate what I think both of them said about this kind of interdisciplinary nature, that I think it can be really important for the creative writing program. I'm a political science major, but I'm taking a creative writing program. And I think both of those, having both of those kind of under my belt, I think really play well with each other, that I think I can really improve some of my, political science writing, having taken a creative writing course. Some of the knowledge I've gained in political science can definitely help my creative writing, nonfiction writing. And so that kind of leads to my next question, which is about, in today's competitive world, what do you think makes Emory's liberal arts education so important?
I don't, Hank, did you want to go first here?
Well, exactly what you were just talking about, Isaiah, that sort of interdisciplinary approach to things, that cross-pollination, forgive me one more time. I just want to say that the Civil Rights Cold Cases Project and by the way, all of our classes are small in creative writing, 15 students. I was able to get 16 in the cold cases because I opened up 4 of the seats to the history department, 4 to the African American Studies department, 4 to the American Studies department program, and 4 to my own, which is English creative writing. And sometimes it's 5 of one and 3 of another, whatever it is. That brings so much added value to every class to have such a mix of students from different disciplines, okay? But we are at a university that values that. And I'm not saying we're the only ones. I'm sure others do too. Interdisciplinary is a word that's almost become cliche. And yet I guess want to say I see every day living proof of it. And it's exuberant. I feel exuberant about that.
You also, I mean, you don't think of yourself as competing when you're the best at what you do. You probably think more about hanging out with the other people who are the best at what they do. Do you know what I mean? So one of the ways that I think the liberal arts education handles competition is by putting you in a position where you can be good at several things. Students at Emory end up graduating little unicorns. You know, they're special because they've got all of these specializations on top of their major. And I think that's really great and really makes for a kind of unstoppable force in the world.
I agree. I think one thing I love the most about Emory is the fact that it gives me the opportunity to learn from other students who are just so cool. They do these amazing activities and come at it with this just passion and love for what they do. And so being able to even just witness that or hear about that has been really impactful because it's made me more excited about what I'm doing and just being able to learn with them.
Catherine, can I add something to that? I'm sorry, because I think this is perfect to what you're saying about our creative writing program. When I had nothing to do with its invention. I just sort of came into it, and I was so happy they accepted me. They haven't learned enough yet to expel me, but all of our classes are workshop, okay, and they all involve peer review, okay. So you are constantly getting feedback from other students in the class, okay? And our classes pre-pandemic were all once a week, 3 hours, because we have a lot to talk about when we're talking about either the writing they're reading or the writing they're doing. So that peer review is really an important factor and part of what we do. So sorry for interrupting, but
No, I love it. I think that's great insight. And then Professor Brown, it looks like you.
I'll just add to that to say 2 things. One, another one of the reasons that our courses are 3 hours is because graduate school courses are. And what we want to do for our undergraduate students in creative writing is put them in a position where they are really handling material as professionals would. And that way, when they go on to handle that material after their undergraduate experience, they're ready, they're used to it, they understand it, they're not, they don't feel winded by a 3-hour course, you know. The other thing I just wanted to say, Catherine, given your most recent comment, is part of the reason why I wanted to do this with you and Isaiah, and part of the reason why I wanted students involved in this, is because I think all of the people out there watching us now really want to see you even more than they want to see me and Professor Klibanoff. I think they want to see us, but they'll believe you. And I think it's important that people better understand that when you go off to college, yes, you are getting an education from your professors who are your teachers for the rest of your life. You know, I still write recommendations for students that I've had 10 or 15 years ago, you know. But also, your education is also from the entirety of the environment. So part of what Professor Klibanoff is saying about the peer review workshop is that it's not just me telling you how to write. It's you seeing other students learn that from each other, right? And what you gain, you don't just gain from me, you gain it reading the work of other students in the class. And that is very particular to creative writing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really fantastic. Not only do I love the fact that Isaiah and I get to ask our questions to y'all and hear these answers, but it really speaks to the professors at large at Emory. I can pop into their office hours and ask them questions. I still talk to one of my professors who was stuck with me for 3 semesters. And it really is so wonderful to be able to make those connections and keep those connections moving forward. And so I was hoping that y'all could speak to how you've still been able to make meaningful connections with students, despite the fact that we are now in a virtual world.
Oh, that's a good question, because that's really a question about the pandemic. And one of the things that I do all the time that I think has more value now even than it did before is every time you have a poem workshop, you meet with me within the week before we have the next workshop class, which means I get one-on-one time with each one of my students, and now I get that time via Zoom. It's very different for me. Learning to teach over Zoom has been one of the biggest things that I'll be able to say that I learned how to do, that I survived. And I learned a lot from it that I think I'll be taking back into the classroom later. But I also think that you create relationships with students because you understand, well, I understand that relationship to be one of the most important relationships in my life, my relationships to my teachers. I thank God for my teachers every day. Sometimes I feel like I cheated. I had such great teachers. And part of what I'm trying to do as a teacher is what they did. When I think about the ways my teachers would go out of their way for me, um, my I have to do that much or more, because I can't do anything less than what created Jericho Brown. I have to at least give what made for my existence. And I had really good teachers, so I'm always trying to know what's going on with my students and where they are individually.
Yeah, I do continue to try to have meetings with students on specific projects or make myself available to them. Sometimes I'll have a TA with me and sometimes not. And that's no different, except that it's not in person. I used to sort of camp out at the the bookstore Starbucks here, and claim a table on Saturdays and Sundays, and students would come and talk to me. And you can't do it in 15 minutes. You really need 20, maybe 30 minutes to really talk about a piece with one student. And that is a challenge right now. I would say, as far as teaching the class, I don't, I have upped my game on how to do a PowerPoint on there, how to bring music into it, how to bring visuals, and turn over some of the teaching to the students. The journalism and the movies class, students are presenting, the weekly backgrounder on the movie we're watching that week. They do the research and they make the presentation. And beyond that, I've also upped my game in bringing more and more guests who can zoom in from anywhere. We're going to be showing the movie Spotlight in a few weeks. It won the Academy Award, about the Boston Globe and its investigation. That won the Pulitzer Prize. And I'm bringing in the head of the Spotlight team, Walter Robinson, who was played by Michael Keaton in the movie. He's coming into my class, and brought in a great film critic, Jonathan Rosenbaum, and writers. Atlanta, fortunately, is a media center, okay? You got CNN, you got all the national news organizations have bureaus here in Atlanta. So we're never at a loss of talented people to bring to the class, but I'm actually ramping that up because it's easier to get somebody to Zoom in than it is to drive here all the time. So it's a very intentional type of thing. And as far as I know, I think, well, Isaiah, you've only had me in the one class, so you can't compare it, but I don't think students who've had me in live and now would say that I teach it differently, that I express it differently. I think they're not getting dizzy watching me walk around the room as much, so.
Yeah, and I'll have to say that the number of guest speakers that we can have now is really amazing. And I think that is, a potential advantage of that virtual experience is people can come in from any place around the world and can speak with us, which I found in Professor Klibanoff's class is really amazing.
Well, and our faculty is really plugged in. The people that Jericho has led us through this great revival and hiring, and we've got such, phenomenal faculty, and Heather Crystal and Tiari Jones and Robin Schiff and Joseph Skybell, Tiffany Yannick, and they are also plugged in to such creative people across the country, and they have contacts that allow them to do the same.
Yeah, one of our newest faculty members, T. Cooper, writes.
Oh, and T. Cooper, you're right. Thank you.
He writes television shows, many of which we watch all the time. He wrote episodes for Netflix shows, for regular once a week ABC shows. And one of the things that he does, because Atlanta has become such a hub, not only as Hank is mentioning, for journalism, but it's also become such a hub for movie and production. As a matter of fact, back and forth between Hollywood, I think Atlanta is sometimes number one these days, and it goes back and forth between number one and number two between Atlanta and Hollywood these last few years. So he teaches a TV writing course, which, again, it's the kind of thing I don't know if you would be able to get it anywhere else,
Great. So I think we'll move now to the Q&A session for the panel. Yeah.
Perfect. I can start us off. We've got some really great questions. So thanks to all of y'all for submitting them. The first one up is, how does diversity or cultural, political, or social background influence the way Emory students approach writing?
How do those things influence the way Emory students are portrayed?
How they approach writing.
Oh, how they
do the writing, right?
I guess that depends on where each student fits as it relates to class and ethnic background, race, etc. That's going to. I mean, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure how to answer that, other than to say part of what we're doing is welcoming perspective and hoping for perspective. This job would not be a good time for me if everyone in the class had the same background. I need various perspectives in order to make the workshop doesn't work if you don't have various perspectives. It's the various perspectives that make you a better writer, because somebody's going to see something that I didn't see, and somebody else is going to see something that that person didn't see. So that's how it works. We want it.
I don't have much to add to that, except that I would say that the one thing that I do face, but honestly, I don't see that there's a demographic difference and diversity, a difference in the diversity of the class about how people respond to the material. Again, on the cold cases thing, these are some horrific stories that I'm having to tell, and some readings. And, to put it quite bluntly, I'm as likely to have, and maybe that the African-American students have heard these things before, okay? And the white students haven't. And they, I had a student send me a note one night, said, this reading that I'm doing is so awful, I don't think I can keep going. And it was about lynchings, and it was pretty awful. I had assigned it 3 years earlier without any quibble, but I could see where sensitivities had changed. And she was absolutely right to bring this up. And I needed to approach that differently, okay? But by and large, students of a certain age who grew up at the same time at various places of the world share an experience that allows them to approach the material in very much the same way, in my classes at least.
Yeah, and that's part of we're answering or trying to answer many of the questions that have to do with the times in which we live. So diversity is necessary for us to do that. I sort of didn't finish making my point about T. Cooper and about Zoom and bringing visitors to the class. What T's class allows for isn't just let me bring in another writer. He can bring in a director because we're meeting in this way. He can bring in a director. He can bring in an actor. He can bring in another writer as well, a producer. So yeah, I think I am fascinated. You know, we do have a very different set of students, and I've never. One thing I love about Emory students is that they are. I have never met a bunch of young people who seem to me so naturally interested in social justice, not just putting on about it, but I have been walked from one trash can to another on campus because I put the wrong thing in the wrong trash can, and a student caught me doing it. So I mean, just that level, just that level of attention to the smallest thing, I think is what makes our classes special and makes me interested. Just thinking about the ethics of what we do as writers and the ethics of what goes on in a classroom. My first reaction to a student, maybe not now, but definitely I can remember a time where my first reaction to a student who couldn't get through the material, I'm like, the course is called lynching. Do you know what I mean? But we're in different times, and so I'm learning a lot from these times, and I need the students to learn that. I don't have influences young enough in my life otherwise.
Great. And so another question that we have, and I'd be particularly interested in your answer to this, Jericho. When you write, do you plan out exactly what you're going to write ahead of time, or do you just start and see where it goes? I'm especially interested just because, in the poetry writing process, I'm not as familiar with that. But how was that process for you like?
I write all of Jericho's best material. Okay. That's what.
And that's all. That's it. That's the answer. I just go to Hank and I say, it's time. I need something.
Yeah,
how much you going to charge me this time? All writing is discovery. You're not going to want to do it unless you're making a discovery. That's not to say that outlining cannot happen, but often you find you need to throw the outline away. I would never outline a poem, but I find generally, although Tiare does this a lot, Tiare Jones, our colleague in fiction, she does this very differently, but generally I think people who are writing novels make an outline first. How much they stick to that outline, I'm not sure. But I know when I'm writing a poem line to line, I want to learn what I have to say as I write the poem. And then I want to revise that toward unity. So I think it depends on what your expectations of revision are and what kind of a thing you're writing. I could see completely writing an outline for an essay, but an essay also should be able to meander enough such that you end up as a writer, this is the case for a poem, and I think this is the case for fiction or any other writing, such that you as a writer say something you did not expect to say. So outlines are great, but they can't be kept to the point where you're not surprising yourself. So I don't use an outline to write poems.
And Professor Klibanoff, could you tell us a little bit about your process for writing, nonfiction, whether it be magazine writing or newspaper writing, or even podcast?
Well, I think you're going to hear something you've heard a lot in my class, which is in a writing class that's nonfiction. I teach that the one thing that's actually more important than the writing is the reporting or the research, but in the journalism, we've called it reporting. So and because you can't write what you don't know. And so, it's a recipe of almost 75% on the reporting and 25% on the writing. And that writing, I'm not dismissing as only 25% important, but you really can't become natural at it and let it flow in the way that it should and think of it structurally until you've done all the reporting. Because if you're starting to sit down to write with too many holes in the reporting, it's like, trying to write about Swiss cheese. I mean, it's just too much you don't already know. So that's, and then, when I did the biggest thing I've ever done, which was the book, The Race Beat, I would often outline to a large extent, but not an outline A, B, C, D or anything like that, but just my sort of ideas. I wanted to do this, then go to here and go to here, go to here, and pretty soon I just abandoned that and say, and open up the file drawer and start pulling out files and writing it that way. I mean, if I've done it right and done a sort of a chapter by chapter summary, then I know what I'm doing. It's there. Everyone has their own predispositions on writing, and you don't want to step on anybody's instincts about how to do writing if they can be good at doing it their own way. Sometimes I think, well, but that's why I'm here, is to teach different ways. So that's all I do, is try to teach different options on ways to approach writing.
Exactly. So an outline might do, or something else might do. And the important thing is that you learn with us the options, because you don't know what writer you're going to become over time. I mean, the writer that I was when I first started out is to start a line and write all the way through to the last line and then work on revision after I've done that. That might still happen, but that's not how many of the poems from the tradition were written. Many of those poems, my most recent book, many of those poems were written taking little snippets from failed poems in the past. The oldest line in a book, the tradition came out in 2019, but the oldest line in that book is from 1999.
Oh, my good.
I keep everything, right? And I take everything. There's a line that I might write in 2002 that's waiting for a revelation I don't have until 2012. But that revelation is stuck in these two lines that aren't working in a poem. Do you understand? I put it with the line from 2002 and suddenly things make sense. So there are various ways to write, but you have to know what the options are. And that's what we're doing. An outline is an option, but it's not the only one.
Now, before we talked about how, do we seek our own passion? I said passion seeks out the person. In this case, your passion sought out the poem.
Yeah, exactly. And I more and more, the longer I do this, the more I really believe that my poems are waiting for their moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I write, I fail, I write, I fail, and I'm much more comfortable with failing. And by failing, what I mean is every time I sit down to write, I don't get up with a poem.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Right.
Because there are other things that will happen. If I live enough, if I make love enough, if I'm friendly enough, then I will have the experiences necessary to add to my poems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really amazing sort of thought process of going about that kind of writing. Another Q&A question that we had sort of touches on something that we spoke about a little bit earlier, but the way that storytelling and social media have now become so intertwined. And how do you think that has related to, I think, a lot of activism that we've been seeing in the past year, especially among students and younger people?
I think it's the best. I think what we saw happen this past summer would not have been able to happen were it not for social media. I also think that people who are not Black, who I guess just thought Black people were lying this whole time, would not be aware of just how violent these state-sanctioned murders can be. Would not be aware of, for instance, police brutality in the way that more people other than Black people are aware of it. Social media allowed for that. So I think it's great. I have to add to that because I'm a poet, so I'm always making a mess because I just said a good thing, but I'm going to say a thing that might mess that up. It's important that we look at social media with nuance. What social media misses, I think, that the work that Hank does, that a newspaper should be doing, or that a magazine should be doing, is allowing for and affording nuance on any subject. For instance, we're in a position now where if you do something inappropriate, and people do inappropriate, horrific things, we're in an era where people feel like, oh, we should take that person who did that inappropriate thing, We should take their books out of the bookstore. We should not teach their books anymore. And maybe that's right, except what does that mean about all the other inappropriate people? I mean, like, no shade. I mean, I don't, you know, I know that this sounds a little crazy, but if we don't, I mean, and I'm all for not reading any books by racist people, not reading anything by racist people, but I also understand, here's the nuance, that means I don't get to read the Constitution. I don't get to read the Declaration of Independence. You know, so I really want us to have nuance and to be honest about our lives, and about what we're doing in this world. And sometimes I think social media misses some of those opportunities for honesty.
That's good. I'll let that be the final word on that, because I think it makes every bit of sense.
Yeah, I think that that was a great reflection and also insight. For one of our last questions, do y'all have any advice or something you'd like to share with the admitted students listening today?
One thing I can say, and it's something we're actually coached by Emory to say, but it just makes every bit of sense, is when you come here, come prepared to have a holistic experience here, to not come in just worried about what grade you're going to get or what class you're going to take or this, that, you know, the very specific things that can cause us anxiety. You know, we have these freshman first year seminars that we, you know, in which we encourage students to take something that's outside their field, outside their area. If you're all about biology, take something else. And I feel that way too, because we really, this is Emory is a candy store, okay? And there's so many choices, and take advantage of as many of those as you can. You're not gonna, if you're conscientious, you're not gonna have any trouble getting all your courses in, maybe doing a double major, maybe going abroad and graduating on time. And we have a good advising system that will help on that. So I would say come in and feel not immediately under pressure like the pistol is about to go off in the fire and you're about to start a 100-yard dash.
I would just add to expect rigor and to be prepared for rigor, to be prepared to work and to get work done, and to be excited about getting the work done that you would most be excited to get done, right? Following your heart and doing what really makes you feel alive. I think that's probably my advice. I would also say it's a good idea. You know, I think Emory is a word that whenever I think about Emory, one of the things that have been what I've been trying to do at Emory and what I try to foster among people wherever I go, but definitely among my students, is a reach for excellence without elitism, to look forward to being the best you can be without also thinking that means you're somehow above somebody else, you know? So I think that's my advice.
I love that. I think both of those insights are very powerful and very meaningful. And I think, at least for me, Emory has done a fantastic job through the classes and the people I've met of not only helping me figure out what my story is, but how to make it go where I want it to go. And so I've loved getting to talk to y'all, and I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you both so much for being with us. We truly, really appreciate it. We know y'all are incredibly busy. And to all of our wonderful admitted students out there, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's been great.